Secret Window should have been a blockbuster, or at least it had the potential to be. Based on a Stephen King novel starring Johnny Depp, who is officially a star thanks to the Pirates of the Caribbean, written and directed by one of the most successful screenwriters of all time, the elements were all there, the planets were aligned. But instead of being met with enthusiastic praise, audiences and critics were almost unanimously underwhelmed. But today we're not only going to talk about the movie Secret Window, we're going to get real freaking deep and ask, where do stories come from? And are there any original ideas left to have? Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. If you like Stephen King movies, uneducated philosophical ramblings, and former teen heartthrobs suffering from dissociative identity disorder, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. This is the fourth video in my 4 Past Midnight series, in which I will be discussing the 2004 screen adaptation of the novella Secret Window, Secret Garden, which is simply entitled Secret Window. In my last video, I discussed the novella and all the instances in which people have accused Stephen King of stealing their stories, so check that video out after this one. So this movie is not bad, but not great either, which is still leaps and bounds better than a lot of the King movies I've discussed on this channel. I'm honestly relieved whenever a King movie or show is just okay as opposed to being a soul-sucking abomination. So yeah, it's not bad or amazing, but it's also based on what may be one of King's more predictable, familiar, perhaps even derivative stories. But there might be a good explanation for that. All right, let's talk about the movie itself for a few minutes before we talk about how King and every author on planet Earth has never had an original idea and how they're all a bunch of no-good, dirty, rotten thieves. History and details. The screenplay for Secret Garden was written and also directed by someone I personally hold in high regard, David Koepp. The reason Koepp has my undying affection is because he wrote the screenplays for the first 2 Jurassic Park movies. Personally, I'm a sucker for all 3 of those original Jurassic Park movies. They're all incredible. Don't at me. On top of that, Koepp wrote the screenplays for the '96 Mission Impossible movie, the 2002 Spider-Man movie, and he also wrote and directed the 1999 film Stir of Echoes, which I remember enjoying at the time of its release, but haven't seen in quite a while. That is, of course, only a small fraction of Koepp's work. In fact, Koepp holds the title for the 9th most successful screenwriter of all time, with his filmography grossing over $2.3 billion at the US box office alone. After reading this, I found that I was curious about who held the #1 spot, and unsurprisingly, that award goes to Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely in a tie. Marcus and McFeely wrote Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, as well as a bunch of the Captain America movies, and have a combined gross box office of over $9 billion. There. Now we both know that useless fact. The soundtrack and score were written by Philip Glass and Jeff Zanelli. I knew I'd heard of the name Philip Glass before, and it turns out he composed an opera called Akhenaten, which premiered in 2019 at the world-famous Metropolitan Opera. We showed a live broadcast of Akhenaten at the art center I manage, and the show was more than just a little divisive, in part due to the fact that the costumes were unconventional and downright offensive to the very delicate sensibilities of your average opera goer. For example, check out this costume with the melted baby heads. And the music was, as many in the audience agreed, maddeningly repetitive. Glass has described himself as a composer of music with repetitive structures. However, it turns out that his approach was a bit too repetitious for the old heads and opera OGs in the audience that day. And yeah, the opening piece of music in Akhenaten alone went on for over 10 minutes. with a single 4-bar melody repeating over and over. So I'm afraid I have to agree with the opera snobs on that one. The other music man involved with Secret Window, Jeff Zanelli, aside from working on a number of film and television scores alongside the likes of Hans Zimmer, has also collaborated with a number of pop and rock musicians, including Pink, Edie Brickell, Robbie Williams, and Story of the Year, as well as worked on a number of video game scores, most notably the Call of Duty franchise. As for their work on Secret Window, Glass and Zanelli composed a brooding and ominous score that does a great job setting a consistent tone of dread and impending doom, which, to Glass's credit, wasn't noticeably repetitive. When it comes to the actual production of the movie, I wasn't able to find many details outside of where the film was made. Secret Window was shot in a number of small lake towns in the Canadian province of Quebec, and that's it. That's all I've got. The cast of Secret Window is small, but with Johnny Depp in the lead role as unstable author and recent divorcee Mort Rainey, they had all the star power they needed. Depp was already a huge star when Secret Window dropped in 2004, but he was really just starting to hit his stride. Depp had already been acting in major motion pictures for 2 decades at that point, with his big screen debut performance being the very first Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984. But his first appearance as Captain Jack Sparrow had come in 2003, the year prior to Secret Window, Secret Garden being released. Just Secret Window, no gardens in this one. So when the movie hit, Depp was just starting down the path to becoming the Hollywood juggernaut he is considered to be today. He delivers a solid performance, but he looks and behaves very organically, like himself. It's as if he showed up on set in his street clothes every day and he was just like, hey, I'm just going to be Johnny Depp for this one. And everyone involved just agreed that was fine. What I mean to say is, during the movie, I'm never not aware that I'm watching Johnny Depp. Does that make sense? And honestly, yeah, he fits the role pretty well. An edgy, bedraggled, and eclectic artist with messy relationship issues. I mean, yeah, that sure sounds like Johnny. Anyway, alongside Depp, we have John Turturro as John Shooter, the deranged stalker who is hell-bent on getting either revenge or irrefutable proof of Rainey's innocence in regards to his allegedly stolen story. Turturro completely embodies the role of Shooter, and when I did my reread of the story, I couldn't picture Shooter or hear his voice as anyone other than Turturro. However, I'm incapable of not picturing Turturro as the Jesus from The Big Lebowski, but his Shooter also reminds me of his character in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Whose name I can't remember. Or maybe he didn't have a name, but in my mind he becomes this sort of amalgamation of Shooter and the Jesus and a convict from the 1930s. Turns out I have a complicated relationship with John Turturro. All of that is to say that Turturro is, for me, the most memorable part of this movie. I won't spend any more time on the cast other than to point out that Timothy Hutton is in the film, and he was also in the 1993 screen adaptation of The Dark Half. Hutton plays Ted, Rainey's ex-wife's new lover, and that said ex being played by Maria Bello. They're both good in their small roles. As for the box office, the movie had a budget of $40 million and grossed $92.9 million worldwide. So while it easily recouped its budget, it wasn't a certified Johnny Depp box office blockbuster by any standard. Critical reception was middling, with no one being deeply moved or blown away, but also no one being deeply disappointed or offended. And yeah, that's kind of how I felt about the movie as well. The acting was fine, and the ending felt a bit rushed, but there was some creative cinematography and camera work, and at no point was it objectively bad. There was one thing that stood out to me that I haven't been able to figure out the reasoning behind. So the movie ends differently than the novella, and this is your spoiler warning for both the novella and the movie. But in the novella, Mort Rainey dies after a violent confrontation with his ex-wife. But in the movie, Mort kills both his ex and her boyfriend. And after all that has gone on, we flash forward, and Rainey has so far not been caught or charged with their deaths. He is still going about his business, but he is suspected by the local authorities and the people in town as well. They all believe he is a murderer. But here's the super weird thing. When Mort is at the grocery store waiting in line, he starts talking to the person in front of him and is sure to point out that he has braces now. Like, for some reason, he has braces. And he mentions it to the person at the store as if it's somehow significant, like they want us, the audience, to know Mort got braces. But why? He leans in, points and gestures at his mouth and says, I got braces. What does that have to do with anything? Did I miss something earlier in the film that made the braces somehow significant? Are the braces meant to represent something? What's with the fucking braces? I don't get it. Alright, so like I said, aside from the inexplicable braces thing, the movie is okay. Not bad, not great, just okay. But what's genuinely interesting is where King got the idea for the original story, how inspiration found him, and the possibility that stories, ideas, and inspiration comes to all of us from somewhere outside of our own consciousness. But before we move into my amateurish analysis, won't you please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, and join me as I regularly devolve into nonsensical tirades about the metaphysical nature of thought and other topics I am completely unqualified to discuss. Thanks in advance. The Well. Alright, so when I had originally decided to discuss this topic, I specifically distinctly remembered a quote from Stephen King where he claimed he was not the source of his stories and ideas, but rather that he was a conduit through which the words and information were filtered, that some vast unknowable plane of all the world's knowledge and theory and culture flow through him and through everyone who writes or creates or simply thinks. And, well, I wasn't able to track down this particular quote. I scoured his essays, interviews, and the internet trying to figure out where I had read or heard this quote, but I never found it. Perhaps it never actually existed and I fabricated the whole thing on my own due to circumstances and reasons unbeknownst to me. But I did at least find a quote from King where he states something similar. In his nonfiction publication on writing, King wrote, quote, "There is no idea dump, no story central, no island of buried bestsellers. Good story ideas seem to come quite literally from nowhere, sailing at you right out of the empty sky. Two previously unrelated ideas come together and make something new under the sun. Your job isn't to find these ideas, but to recognize them when they show up." Unquote. And I find this quote to be contradictory in a way. Who's to say there is no idea dump, as King so crudely calls it, from which all thought and wisdom originates, that there is no ethereal collective consciousness from which story ideas come? If not from the idea dump, where do these ideas that, in King's words, come seemingly from nowhere, right out of the empty sky, originate? So before I go on, I suppose I should explain why I wanted to discuss this topic about where stories and inspiration comes from. In Secret Window, John Shooter accuses Mort Rainey of stealing his story, and in a number of instances, which I discussed in my last video, Stephen King was accused of stealing other people's stories. That got me thinking about the possibility and even the likelihood that writers are often having the same or at least similar ideas, and that the sources of inspiration or that idea dump are the same for everyone, as we all exist in the same reality, at least theoretically. But while King posits that there is no story central or island of buried bestsellers, I don't entirely agree. I think the idea dump exists and that it can both be scavenged through by those fortunate enough to find it, but well hidden enough that most don't even know where to look or that it even exists. Okay, so do I believe that there is some literal, intangible, celestial plane that contains all of the world's collective thoughts and cumulative intelligence? Not exactly, but kind of. The world is made up of billions of people, billions more of which have come before us, and between all of those individuals and individual experiences and the shared experiences of individuals are an infinite amount of histories and discoveries and revelations that have been recorded and documented and written about and discussed for centuries. Billions of individual experiences which amassed and accumulated to become knowledge and language, and that knowledge, those centuries, those millennia of lives filled with encounters, events, incidences, and occurrences have all culminated to shape our current reality, to construct the present. The inventions and discoveries of hundreds of generations long past have all collectively determined everything, and every day, every moment, that process continues as we, those who are here now, further expand upon the totality and ongoing process of human development. And so we all have this unfettered access to this unfathomably deep well of the human psyche. We all drop our buckets into the same well, and we all draw our creative waters from and drink from that same source. Some folks may have a longer rope and are able to plumb the depths of those waters and to reach deeper into the dark recesses and stir up the sediment. These are the deep thinkers, the storytellers, those who have the will or perhaps the need to know more, to drink more deeply, while some are just able to skim a little water off of the surface, and that's all they require to slake their thirst. They don't care what's at the bottom of the well. They don't desire more, or perhaps they don't have a long enough rope to plunge their bucket to a greater depth. All of this is to say, and I hope you'll forgive the well analogy, clearly I don't have that long of a rope. Anyway, all of this is to say that writers, like the rest of us, have access to the seemingly endless but also simultaneously finite resources of the cumulative human experience, which can only be expressed through the limited vocabulary of existing language. I once wondered if it was possible at this point in the timeline of existence to have an original thought, to have one original thought or utter one single sentence that had never once previously entered into the mind or come from the mouth of someone else, and I have my doubts. The only thing that sets writers apart from the rest of us is that they have longer ropes and they have the good sense to write about what they pulled from the well. I mean, let's think for a second about King's bibliography. How many of his stories are based on existing lore or previously established concepts? Vampires, werewolves, haunted houses, telekinesis, epic journeys, split personalities, time travel, curses, demigods, alien invasions. You get the idea. King didn't come up with any of these things on his own. That's not to say he hasn't pulled out a few of his own bizarre concepts over the years, though. The Lawnmower Man comes to mind. The well of thought water or whatever somehow manages to get deeper with every passing day, and King has absolutely made his own contributions to that wellspring. But even King's more wild, out-of-left-field tales like The Lawnmower Man have roots in Greek mythology. I think there is an idea dump, a story central. I believe there has to be, at least in an intangible, sum is greater than its parts sort of way. To be clear, I'm not saying that good writers aren't uniquely talented or that anyone can do it. That's obviously not the case. A good writer can take these pre-existing notions and accumulated experiences and worldly knowledge and turn them into their own unique piece that further adds to the ever-expanding lexicon of human consciousness. And that lexicon, it kind of is infinite in that with every person born, there is one more individual experience melding together and spilling into the well, mixing itself with those other older waters. Well, it's only infinite if humankind itself is infinite, which I think we can realistically say will not forever be the case. But so long as we exist as conscious beings, the depth of the water increases in perpetuity. And hey, don't think about the well analogy too deeply. I started to, and then realized that we would both be the water and the ones holding the rope simultaneously, and I started spiraling into a paradoxical state of mindfuckery and found myself trying to determine whether the bucket was supposed to represent the human mind or just the world at large, and if the length of one's rope was me saying that those who have short ropes are unintelligent and those with longer ropes are smarter than the rest of us, and then questioning the length of my own rope, which from what my wife tells me, the length of my rope is average at best. But anyway, how does this all tie into the movie Secret Window? What was the point I was trying to make, and what is the significance to the topic of discussion? How the hell should I know? I didn't actually come up with any of this. I just pulled it from the well. And I didn't have that much rope to work with. Final thoughts. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you came here looking for a straight-up movie review, you've come to the wrong place, and by now I'm sure you've realized that. I mean, anyone who is still here at this point likely figured that out half a tangent ago, so for those of you who have stuck around and have listened to me ramble on about the thoughts that have been ricocheting around inside of my head these last few weeks, I appreciate that you took the time to listen, even if neither of us is entirely sure what you just listened to. As for the movie Secret Window, you could do a lot worse. This isn't among my favorite King adaptations, but the novella isn't among my favorite King stories, so that isn't entirely surprising. Everyone involved in making the film did a fine job, but if there's one thing I could change about the movie, it's those damn braces. Why the hell were the braces a thing? Why does he point them out to someone, literally point at his mouth and say, braces, I got braces? This part is unscripted. I did go on to look that up and try to figure it out, and some people are saying it's because he had, like, at the end of the movie, he's going like has some kind of a jaw tick, mouth tick thing. Other people have surmised it was because he got kicked in the face by, I think, Ted, or maybe it was by his wife at the end of the movie. I can't remember. But anyway, some people are saying it's for those reasons. Also, somebody else said, oh, it was Johnny Depp's idea. He thought it would add depth to the character. Hard disagree. The braces were stupid. Boo. Anyway, in 2 weeks, I will be discussing the third story from 4 Past Midnight, which is entitled The Library Policeman. This is my favorite of the 4 novellas, and it is a dark, disturbing story of suppressed memories, childhood trauma, and the perils of trying to exist as an adult while still harboring and processing those traumatic formative experiences. It's gonna be a rough one for sure, and oddly enough, I am very much looking forward to it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks to all my subs and constant commenters for leaving your thoughts in the comment sections of all of my videos. I appreciate your time and your contributions to this channel. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Okay, goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty pleased with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.